Danny Wright had never imagined himself standing in a crystal tower that floated above a world he couldn't even pronounce the name of. Yet here he was, representing all of humanity at the biggest diplomatic party the galaxy had ever thrown for Earth. The reception hall stretched out before him like something from a fever dream. Massive columns of light held up a ceiling that showed the stars themselves, and creatures from 100 different worlds mingled and talked in voices that ranged from musical chimes to deep rumbles that Danny felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears. "You look nervous," Lisa Martinez said beside him, and Danny was grateful for her presence because Lisa had been doing this cultural attach work for 3 months already and knew which aliens found eye contact rude and which ones considered it essential. "I'm terrified," Danny admitted, watching a being made entirely of what looked like purple smoke drift past them. Lisa laughed and adjusted the translation device on her collar, which was smaller than the clunky thing Danny wore but somehow worked better. She had explained the technology to him twice and he still didn't really understand it beyond alien space magic, as he privately called it. "Just remember," Lisa said, "most of them are more curious than anything else. They've never met humans before and were basically the new kids at school." Danny nodded and tried to look confident, which was hard when a creature that resembled a giant mantis wearing robes was heading straight toward him with what he desperately hoped was a friendly expression reading alien body. Language was not something his history PhD had prepared him for. "Ambassador Wright," the mantis being said, and the translator made its clicking sounds into smooth English. "I am Ambassador Vec Thar of the Collective, and I have been hoping to speak with you all evening." Danny shook the extended appendage, not quite a hand but close enough, and smiled in what he hoped was a universal, friendly gesture. "The pleasure is mine, Ambassador Vec Thar," Danny said, using the formal tone Lisa had coached him on during the shuttle ride here. "I hope you're enjoying the reception." Vec Thar's compound eyes seemed to shimmer with what might have been amusement, though Danny was only guessing based on the warm tone the translator conveyed. "Very much so," Vec Thar replied. "But I confess I sought you out for a specific reason. My people are fascinated by human history and culture, and I was hoping you might satisfy my curiosity about something." Lisa gave Danny a subtle nod that meant, "This is good. Engage with this." And Danny relaxed slightly because answering questions about history was actually something he knew how to do. "Of course," Danny said. "I taught history for 15 years before all this. So ask away." Vec Thar made a sound that the translator interpreted as pleased, and Danny noticed that several other aliens had drifted closer, apparently interested in whatever conversation was about to happen. "Wonderful," Vec Thar said. "Then perhaps you can settle a debate among my colleagues. We have been studying Earth's records since your planet joined the Council, and we are confused about your military history." Danny felt his stomach tighten slightly, but kept his expression neutral. "What specifically confuses you?" he asked. "Well," Vec Thar said, tilting his head in a way that looked unsettlingly like a curious dog, "how many wars has Earth fought?" The question seemed simple enough, and Danny opened his mouth to answer before realizing he had absolutely no idea what number to give. "That's actually a complicated question," Danny said carefully, aware that more aliens were definitely listening now. "Could you be more specific?" Vec Thar's confusion was clear, even across species barriers. "I do not understand the difficulty," he said. "For example, my people fought 2 wars in our history, the Unification War and the border conflict with the neighboring system, so our answer would be 2. How many has Earth fought?" Danny looked at Lisa, who looked back at him with an expression that clearly said, "You're the history expert. You handle this." And Danny wished desperately that he had prepared for this exact question. "Well," Danny said slowly, "it depends on your calendar." The translation of his words seemed to cause a ripple of confusion among the gathered aliens. And Vecthar leaned forward with clear interest. "Your calendar?" Vecthar asked, "What does time measurement have to do with counting conflicts?" Danny took a breath and decided honesty was probably the best approach here. "I mean, it depends on how you're counting and what time period you're looking at," he explained. "For instance, are we counting declared wars between nations? Or do civil wars count? What about tribal conflicts? Do those matter? And how far back are we going?" Vecthar's antennae twitched in what Danny was learning to recognize as confusion. "All conflicts where your people fought your people," Vecthar said, as if this clarified everything. "From the beginning of your civilization to now." Danny did some quick mental math and realized there was no good way to answer this that wouldn't sound absolutely insane. "Thousands," he said finally. And the words seemed to hang in the air like a physical thing. The gathered aliens went silent, and Danny saw several of them exchange what were clearly concerned looks. "Thousands?" a new voice asked, and Danny turned to see a being that looked like a bipedal lizard covered in blue scales. "You cannot mean thousands, surely." "I mean," Danny said, feeling like he was digging himself into a hole but not knowing how to stop. Recorded human history goes back about 5,000 years, and in that time, I'd estimate we've had somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 distinct armed conflicts. Though the number could be higher depending on how you define war versus battle versus skirmish. The blue lizard being made a sound that the translator rendered as distressed. And Vecthar's posture had gone very still. "That cannot be correct," Vecthar said quietly. "Most species in the Council have fought between 2 and 5 wars in their entire history." Danny felt the weight of every alien eye in the vicinity on him now. "How is that possible?" he asked, genuinely curious despite the growing tension. "Because," Vecthar said, and his tone had gone from curious to something Danny couldn't quite identify. "Most species unify their world after 1 or 2 major conflicts, and then turn their attention to space. The idea of fighting thousands of wars implies a level of sustained violence that is," he paused, searching for words, concerning to many council members. Lisa stepped in smoothly, her diplomatic training taking over. "I think there's some important context we need to provide," she said, addressing not just Vecthar, but all the listening aliens. "Earth's history is complex because we developed multiple separate civilizations over thousands of years. But you are one species," the blue lizard said. "Confused. Yes," Danny agreed. "But we were separated by oceans and mountains and distance. So different groups of humans developed different cultures and languages and governments. And sometimes those groups came into conflict." Vecthar was silent for a long moment. And when he spoke again, his voice was very careful. "Ambassador Wright," he said, "I think perhaps you and I should speak with the Cultural Integration Committee as soon as possible. Because if what you are saying is true, then the Council may have made a serious error in accepting humanity as members." Danny felt his blood run cold but forced himself to stay calm. "Why would that be an error?" he asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Because," Vecthar said gently, almost apologetically, "species that cannot stop fighting themselves are not usually considered stable enough for galactic citizenship." The conference room was smaller than Danny had expected, though he supposed that made sense since this meeting wasn't supposed to be public knowledge. The Cultural Integration Committee had agreed to hear humanity's case in private before making any official recommendations to the full Council. Danny sat at one end of a table that seemed to be made of solidified water, which Lisa had assured him was perfectly normal furniture for the aquatic species who chaired this committee. And he tried not to think about how the next few hours might determine whether humanity got to stay in the galactic community or got sent home in disgrace. "I still can't believe Vecthar," actually filed a formal concern, Lisa muttered, reviewing her notes on a display tablet that was more advanced than anything Earth had produced even now. 6 months after making contact, he didn't have a choice, Kevin Park said from across the table. And Danny was grateful the military historian had agreed to come on short notice. Once the word got out at the reception that humans had fought thousands of wars, the cat was out of the bag. Kevin had flown in from the human embassy station just that morning, looking tired but determined in his old military uniform that he'd worn for credibility, as he put it. And Danny had to admit that having someone who had actually served in combat, lending their voice to this discussion, might help the door open, or rather, irised open in that unsettling organic way some alien technology had, and Ambassador Jelker glided in on what Danny had learned were actually hundreds of tiny legs hidden under the ambassador's robes, giving the impression of smooth floating movement. Ambassador Wright, attached Martinez. Historian Park, Jelker said, in a voice that sounded like water over rocks. Thank you for meeting on such short notice. They all stood and made the appropriate gestures of respect, which for Jelker's species meant a slight bow with both hands pressed together. And Danny was grateful again for Lisa's coaching, because he would have absolutely messed this up otherwise. The honor is ours. Ambassador Jelker, Danny said formally. We understand the committee has concerns about humanity's historical record. Jelker settled into a chair, though settled wasn't quite right, since the ambassador seemed to pour himself into it like mercury, and fixed Danny with eyes that were entirely black and somehow kind despite their alienness. Concerns is putting it mildly, Jelker said, and his tone was gentle but serious. 3 council members have already filed motions to review humanity's membership, and I have been tasked with determining whether these concerns have merit. Danny felt his heart sink, but Kevin leaned forward with the calm he'd probably learned in combat. May I ask? Ambassador, Kevin said, what exactly concerns them? Jelker made a rippling gesture that meant something like a human shrug. The numbers primarily, he said. When Vecthar reported that humans claimed to have fought thousands of wars, many species found this incomprehensible. To put it in context, the average council species has engaged in between 2 and 7 total military conflicts in their entire recorded history. Lisa pulled up a chart on her tablet and projected it into the air above the table, showing a timeline of Earth's major conflicts, if I may, she said. I think the confusion comes from different definitions of what constitutes a war, and also from fundamental differences in how species developed. Jelker studied the floating timeline with interest. Explain, please, he said. Kevin took over the presentation, his military background making him comfortable with briefings. Most species you've described seem to have had one dominant culture or civilization that unified their planet relatively quickly, Kevin said. Is that accurate? Jelker nodded, a gesture he'd probably learned from observing humans, since his own species didn't naturally move that way. Yes, he confirmed. For example, my people evolved on a planet with one massive interconnected ocean system. So while we had regional differences, we were never truly separated from each other. Our first radio broadcasts reached our entire species within a generation. Earth wasn't like that, Danny said. Seeing where Kevin was going, we had multiple continents separated by vast oceans. We had mountain ranges and deserts and ice caps that divided populations. So humanity didn't develop as one culture, we developed as dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of different cultures. The timeline floating above the table shifted, and Danny recognized Lisa's work. She'd reorganized it to show not just wars, but the civilizations fighting them. These are just some of the major human civilizations that developed independently. Lisa explained. The Chinese dynasties, the Romang Empire, the various African kingdoms, The Aztec and Inca in the Americas, the Mongol hordes. The European nation-states, all of these groups of humans developed their own languages, beliefs, governments, and yes, their own conflicts. Jelker studied the display with what seemed like fascination. So you are saying that humanity fought so many wars not because you are inherently violent, but because you were essentially multiple separate civilizations sharing one world? He asked. Exactly, Kevin said. And many of those conflicts were actually relatively small border disputes. Succession wars, tribal conflicts that might have involved only thousands of people. Not millions. Danny saw an opening and took it. Ambassador, what was the deadliest war your people ever fought? Jelker was quiet for a moment. And when he spoke, his voice carried weight. The War of the Thermal Vents, he said. 2 major population centers fought over access to geothermal energy sources. Approximately 40,000 of my people died before peace was achieved. And that tragedy led directly to our global government forming to prevent such horror from ever happening again. Danny nodded respectfully. That is a terrible loss, he said sincerely. And I don't want to diminish it at all, but for context, humanity's deadliest conflict, what we call World War II, killed somewhere between 70 and 85 million people. The number seemed to physically impact Jelker, whose form rippled in what Danny was learning to recognize as shock. 85 million? He said quietly. That is more than our entire species' population. Yes, Danny said. But here's what I want you to understand. That war ended 80 years ago. And in the time since, despite our history, despite all those thousands of conflicts, humanity managed to create global institutions designed to prevent exactly that kind of horror from happening again. Lisa pulled up new images. The United Nations building. Peacekeeping forces, international courts. We created the United Nations, she said. We wrote the Geneva Conventions to set rules for warfare. We established war crimes tribunals. We built networks of treaties and alliances specifically designed to make war less likely and less terrible when it does happen. Kevin added his perspective. I'm a veteran, he said. I fought in regional conflicts and I saw terrible things. But I also saw something important. I saw soldiers from different nations working together as peacekeepers. I saw former enemies becoming allies. I saw my own grandfather who fought in World War II shake hands with men who had been his enemies. Because humans learned something from all that bloodshed. What did you learn? Jelker asked, and his tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Danny thought about all the history he'd taught, all the wars he'd studied, all the patterns he'd seen. We learned that peace is harder than war, he said finally. We learned that talking is harder than fighting. We learned that building something together takes more courage than destroying it. And most importantly, we learned that we keep having to choose peace over and over again, because it doesn't just happen automatically. Jelker was silent for a long time, studying the images and data floating between them. You said you fought thousands of wars, he said slowly. But you also created thousands of treaties. Agreements and peace accords, did you not? Danny nodded. For every war in human history, he said, there's at least one peace that followed it, and most of those pieces held. At least for a while. What troubles the Council, Jelker said carefully, is the question of what happens when humanity encounters conflict in the galaxy. Will you resort to your historical patterns of warfare? Kevin answered before Danny could. Ambassador, I've studied military history my whole career, he said. And here's what I can tell you. Humans fight hardest when we're protecting something or someone we care about. We fought civil wars over the right of people to be free. We fought world wars to stop genocides. We fought small battles to protect our families and our homes. So the real question isn't whether humans will fight. It's what will we fight for? Jelker seemed to consider this. And what would humanity fight for now? he asked. Danny met the ambassador's black eyes steadily. "We'd fight to protect the innocent," he said. "We'd fight to defend those who can't defend themselves. We'd fight to stop atrocities. But we'd also do everything possible to avoid fighting in the first place. Because we know exactly how terrible war really is. And that knowledge cost us millions of lives to gain." The ambassador was quiet, and Danny couldn't read his expression at all. "I will need to present this information to the committee," Jelker said finally, "and I cannot promise they will be convinced. But I will tell them this humanity's history of war is also a history of learning, and perhaps that is worth considering." The council chamber was the largest room Danny had ever seen, and he'd been inside sports stadiums back on Earth that could hold 50,000 people. This space made those look like closets. Hundreds of species filled the tiered seating that curved around the central platform where Danny now stood. And each species had their own section with atmosphere and gravity adjustments that let them exist comfortably, which meant some sections were filled with water and others with gases Danny couldn't even see, but which his nose told him were definitely there. "You've got this," Lisa whispered from her position just off the platform. And Danny wished he felt as confident as she sounded. The lights dimmed at least. The lights visible to human eyes dimmed. Who knew what was happening in other spectrums? And Danny's presentation began projecting on screens and holograms positioned throughout the chamber so every species could see. Honored council members. Danny began, and his voice was amplified somehow without being louder, just clearer. "I am Ambassador Daniel Wright of Earth, and I'm here to address concerns about humanity's history of warfare." The chamber was silent, except for the background hum of life support systems, and Danny was acutely aware of how many beings were watching him. "I'm not going to lie to you or hide the facts," he continued, pulling up the first image, a timeline of human history, marked with conflict after conflict. Humanity has fought approximately 4,000 documented wars in our recorded history, and that number only includes conflicts significant enough to be written about. The actual number of all armed conflicts is likely much higher. A ripple went through the assembly, and Danny saw several species making gestures he didn't recognize, but which probably meant shock or dismay, for anyone could interrupt. He pressed on. "I know that sounds horrifying," he said, "because it is horrifying. But I want to explain the context of why this happened and what it means for humanity's place in the council." The timeline shifted, showing Earth's geography. Earth is a diverse world with 7 major landmasses separated by vast oceans. Danny explained. Humanity evolved in Africa and then spread across the entire planet over hundreds of thousands of years, and as we spread, we became isolated from each other. New images appeared, different human cultures from different time periods. These isolated populations developed independently, he said. Different languages, different beliefs, different forms of government, different technologies for most of our history. Humans on one continent didn't even know humans on other continents existed. A voice rang out from the avian section of the chamber, and Danny recognized Ambassador Krisa, who Lisa had warned him was leading the opposition to humanity. "This explains the number, but not the violence," Krisa said, and his species translator made his words sound sharp and accusatory. "My people also had regional differences before we unified. Yet we fought only 3 wars before achieving global peace." Danny had expected this and nodded respectfully. "How long did it take your people to achieve global peace after developing advanced technology?" He asked, and Kriya seemed taken aback by the question being turned around. "Approximately 200 years, he said. "And how many separate populations did your world have?" Danny pressed. "We had 7 major nations at our technological peak," Krisa said. Clearly not seeing where this was going, Danny pulled up a new image, a map of Earth in 1914. "This is Earth approximately 100 years ago," he said. At this time, humanity had over 60 recognized nations and hundreds of distinct ethnic and cultural groups. We had multiple competing empires, dozens of different governmental systems, and no global communication network that reached everyone. The chamber was silent as species took in the complexity. Kevin Park stepped forward, and Danny was grateful for the backup. "If I may add some perspective," Kevin said, "I've studied the military history of every council species we have records for. And there's a clear pattern. Most of you achieved unity through one of three methods." He pulled up comparative data. Either one culture dominated and absorbed the others peacefully, or a single devastating war shocked your species into unity, or you encountered something that forced you to work together, Kevin explained. Humanity didn't have any of those advantages. We had no external threat, no single dominant culture, and our wars, while terrible, were never quite terrible enough to force global cooperation. Until they were, Danny said quietly. And the timeline jumped forward to show World War II. This conflict killed roughly 85 million people. It involved nearly every nation on Earth. It saw the development of weapons capable of destroying entire cities. And it finally shocked humanity into understanding that we needed global cooperation, or we would destroy ourselves. Images of the United Nations, the Geneva Conventions, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights flashed across the screens. The aftermath of our deadliest war led to humanity's greatest achievements in cooperation, Danny said. We created institutions designed to prevent such horror from ever happening again. We established rules for warfare to protect civilians. We wrote down fundamental human rights and tried to enforce them globally. Tried being the operative word. Krisa interjected. You still have conflicts on Earth today, do you not? Danny didn't flinch from the question. Yes, he admitted. We have regional conflicts. We have terrorism, we have crime and violence. But the scale is vastly different. We haven't had a global war in 80 years. The percentage of humans dying in armed conflict is lower now than at any point in our recorded history. And the trend continues downward. Lisa stepped up with additional data. To quantify this, she said, in the year 1944, approximately 4% of Earth's population was directly involved in active warfare. In 2025, that number was approximately 0.03%. We're not perfect, but we're learning. A new voice spoke up, and Danny recognized the crystalline form of Council Speaker Talman, who had remained silent until now. Ambassador Wright, Talman said, and the ancient being's voice resonated through the chamber like a bell. You present an interesting case, but you have not answered the fundamental question. Why didn't humanity destroy itself? The question hung in the air, and Danny realized this was the moment that mattered most. Because we kept choosing not to, he said simply. After every war, humans had a choice, seek revenge or seek peace. And yes, sometimes we chose revenge. Sometimes we let old hatreds drive us into new conflicts, but more often than we get credit for. We chose peace. He pulled up new images, Japanese and American veterans shaking hands at Pearl Harbor, French and German leaders standing together at Verdun, South African reconciliation commissions. These are former enemies choosing reconciliation, Danny said. My own grandfather fought against the Japanese in World War II, and before he died, he traveled to Japan and met with veterans he'd fought against. And they shared tea and talked about peace. Because that's what humans do, we fight, yes. But then we try to forgive, Kevin added quietly. Every human war has ended with someone choosing to stop fighting, to extend a hand, to try for something better. And that choice is what defines us more than the conflicts themselves. Ambassador Vekthar spoke up from the insectoid section. And Danny was surprised to hear his tone was thoughtful rather than hostile. I have been researching human history since our conversation at the reception, Vekthar said. And I discovered something interesting. Humans have a saying. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And you study your wars extensively, teaching every generation about the horrors and the costs. Danny nodded. History education is mandatory in most human societies. He confirmed. We make our children learn about the wars we fought, the mistakes we made, the lives we lost, because we never want to forget what violence costs. Talman spoke again, and this time there was something almost approving in his tone. So humanity fights to remember and remembers to avoid fighting? He asked. That's the goal, Danny said. We don't always succeed, but we keep trying. Krisa made a frustrated sound. Fine words, he said. But how can we trust that humanity won't bring its violent tendencies to the galaxy? What happens when you encounter a species you disagree with? Will you wage war on them as you wage war on each other? Danny met Krisa's eyes steadily. We fought 4,000 wars against ourselves, he said. And in every single one, we were fighting other humans. People who looked like us, who shared our biology, who were fundamentally our own kind. And yes, that's terrible. But it also means something important. He paused, making sure everyone was listening. It means that when we encountered aliens for the first time, when we met you, we didn't see enemies, Danny said. We saw new friends, new teachers, new possibilities. Because if we could eventually make peace with each other after 4,000 wars, imagine what we can build with species we've never fought at all. The chamber was silent, and Danny couldn't tell if that was good or bad. We're not asking you to ignore our history, he said quietly. We're asking you to see it for what it really is, a story of a species that kept making mistakes and kept trying to do better. We fought so many wars that we've learned exactly how terrible they are. And that knowledge makes us value peace more than any species that's never known real conflict. Talman's crystalline form seemed to glow slightly. The council will need to deliberate. 3 days of waiting felt like 3 years to Danny, who had exhausted every tourist attraction on the council's central station and had taken to pacing the human delegations' quarters while the council debated humanity's fate behind closed doors. You're going to wear a hole in the floor, Lisa said, without looking up from her work, reviewing diplomatic protocols for what felt like the 100th time. I can't just sit still while they decide if we get kicked out of the galaxy, Danny muttered. Continuing his pacing, Kevin sat in the corner cleaning his side-on, which was purely ceremonial since weapons weren't needed on the council station. But he told Danny it helped him think, and he looked up with a slight smile. They're not going to kick us out, Kevin said with the confidence of someone who'd seen worse situations. Worst case, they put us on probation or something. A chime at the door interrupted them, and Lisa called out permission to enter. The door opened to reveal Vekthar, and Danny's stomach dropped because the ambassador's posture looked tense even by alien standards. I apologize for the intrusion, Vekthar said. But I thought you should know the debate in council has become quite heated. How heated? Danny asked, gesturing for Vekthar to sit, which the insectoid did gratefully. Krisa has presented new evidence, Vekthar said carefully. Footage of ongoing conflicts on Earth, statistics about human crime rates, reports of what he calls endemic violence in human society. Lisa's expression darkened. That's completely out of context, she said. Every species has crime. Every world has problems. I know, Vekthar said gently. And I have tried to make that argument, but Krisa is very persuasive. And several council members are genuinely frightened of what humanity might do if allowed to remain. Danny sat down heavily, feeling the weight of it all. Why is he so against us? He asked as Vidura's antennae drooped in. What Danny had learned meant sadness or regret. Because his people made a different choice than yours, he said quietly. The avian species, Krisa's people, they achieved peace through biological modification. They literally changed their own genetics to remove aggressive tendencies, and it worked. They have had no wars in 3,000 years. So he thinks we should do the same? Kevin asked. He thinks anyone who doesn't is dangerous. Vecthar confirmed a new voice came from the doorway. And Danny turned to see a human woman he didn't recognize mid-30s, wearing what looked like a doctor's coat. Actually, the woman said, "It's more complicated than that. I'm Michelle Chun, xenopsychologist with the human delegation. And I've been studying council species approaches to conflict resolution." Lisa stood and made introductions quickly, and Michelle accepted a seat before continuing. Most council species chose one of three paths to peace, she explained. Biological modification, like Croesus people. Technological enforcement through AI monitoring and intervention. Or social engineering through strict cultural controls. But not humans, Danny said. Understanding. Exactly, Michelle confirmed. We chose the slow path social evolution without forced biological or technological changes. We kept our free will. We kept our ability to choose violence, even as we tried to choose peace instead. And that terrifies species who eliminated that choice from their own societies. Kevin nodded slowly. So they don't trust us because we could still choose to fight. Even if we say we won't. Precisely, Michelle said, before anyone could respond. Alarms began blaring throughout the station, not the fire alarm sound Danny knew from Earth, but a deep, pulsing tone that made his bones vibrate. Lisa jumped up and pulled up her communicator, her face going pale as she read the incoming message. "There's been an attack," she said. "Some kind of raid on a civilian colony in the Outer Rim, pirates or raiders. The report isn't clear." Vecthar was on his feet immediately. "Which colony?" He demanded. "Settlement designated Harmony Point," Lisa read. "Mixed species civilian population, mostly families and researchers. Approximately 1,500 inhabitants." Vecthar made a sound of distress. "My nephew is stationed there," he said. "He's a cultural researcher studying interspecies cooperation." Danny's diplomat training kicked in. "Is the council sending help?" he asked. Lisa's expression was grim. "That's the problem," she said. "Harmony Point is 4 light years from the nearest council military outpost. Their fastest ships would take 3 days to get there. The colony only has minimal defenses." Kevin was already moving, pulling up tactical displays on his own communicator. "How far are we from Harmony Point?" he asked. "Why does that matter?" Vecthar asked. "Because," Kevin said, meeting the alien's compound eyes steadily, "human ships use a different kind of drive system than council vessels. We can get there in 18 hours. The room went silent, except for the continuing alarms. "You would help?" Vecthar asked quietly. "Of course we would," Danny said. "Those are innocent civilians under attack." Lisa was shaking her head. "Danny, the council is literally debating whether to kick us out right now. If we send military ships without permission, it could be seen as aggressive. And if we don't send help and 1,500 beings die, including Vecthar's nephew, what do you think that says about humanity?" Kevin countered. Danny stood there, caught between diplomat and soldier, between political calculation and moral imperative. "What's the tactical situation?" he asked Kevin. Kevin pulled up what data they had. "Raiders hit the colony 2 hours ago," he said. "Preliminary reports suggest they're after resources and research data, but they're not afraid to hurt civilians. The colony's defense force is basically security guards with stun weapons. We have 3 ships in the sector," Danny said. Thinking out loud, the diplomatic courier and 2 escort frigates. "The escorts are armed," Kevin confirmed. "Nothing heavy, but enough to give pirates second thoughts." Michelle spoke up quietly. "I should mention," she said, "the council is watching how humanity responds to this. If you send military aid without authorization, Creasy will call it proof that humans are warmongers. But if you don't send help when you're the only ones who can, then we prove we don't actually care about protecting innocents. Danny Finishedvika stepped forward. Ambassador Wright, he said formally, I cannot officially request human military intervention. I do not have that authority, but as a private individual, I am begging you to help save my nephew and the other civilians at Harmony Point. Danny looked at Lisa, who shrugged helplessly. I can't make this call for you, she said, politically. It's a disaster either way. Danny turned to Kevin. If you take the escorts, can you get there in time? He asked. Probably, Kevin said, but I can't guarantee we can stop the raiders. Just that we can try. The alarms continued their pulsing rhythm, and Danny thought about all the history he'd taught, all the wars he'd studied, all the moments when people had to choose between safe and right. Kevin, he said, take the escorts, get to Harmony Point. Protect those civilians. What about the council? Lisa asked. I'll deal with the council, Danny said. But I'm not going to let people die just to make us look good politically. That's not who humans are. Kevin was already moving toward the door. I'll need a security team, he said. Take whoever volunteers, Danny told him. But make it clear they're doing this against political advice. They won't care, Kevin said with a slight smile. Marines live for this kind of thing. As Kevin left, Danny turned to Vekthar. I need you to take me to the council chamber, he said. Right now. They are in closed session, Vekthar protested. I don't care, Danny said. They're about to see exactly what humans do when innocents are in danger. Lisa grabbed her diplomatic satchel. If we're going to crash a council session, she said. We're doing it properly, Michelle. You're coming too. They should hear the psychological context. The four of them rushed through the station corridors, and Danny felt strangely calm despite the stakes. They reached the council chamber to find guards blocking the entrance. But Vekthar spoke rapidly in his own language, and then in council standard. I am invoking emergency family protection rights, he said. My blood relative is in danger, and I demand the council hear relevant information. The guards looked uncertain but stepped aside, and the doors opened to reveal the full council in heated debate speaker. Talmon's voice rang out. This session is closed. My nephew is dying while you debate, Vekthar interrupted. And the chamber went silent at the breach of protocol. And the humans are the only ones who can save him. Croesus stood from his section. What is the meaning of this interruption? He demanded. Danny stepped forward, knowing he had one chance to get this right. Ambassador Croesus, Honor Council, he said. You've spent 3 days debating whether humanity is too violent for galactic society. And now you have a chance to see what we actually do when faced with violence against innocents. He pulled up the tactical display for everyone to see. 1,500 civilians are under attack at Harmony Point. Danny said, your military can't reach them in time. But human ships can, so I've authorized our escort vessels to respond. The chamber erupted in shocked voices, and Croesus' shout rose above them all. You send military ships without council authorization? He demanded. This proves everything I've said about human aggression. No, Danny said firmly. It proves that humans will risk political consequences to save lives. We could have sat here and let them die while we protected our image, but that's not who we are. The council chamber had been converted into an impromptu command center, with displays showing the tactical situation at Harmony Point transmitted in real time from the human escort ships. And Danny watched helplessly from 4 light years away as Commander Kyle Morrison led the rescue operation. Human vessel approaching attack zone, the communications officer announced. And Kyle's voice came through crystal clear despite the distance. We're reading 6 raider ships, mixed classes. They're concentrating fire on the colony's shield generator. Danny stood beside Talmon and the other council leaders, aware that every decision Kyle made in the next hours would be judged by hundreds of species. Morrison, "This is Council observation," Talman said. Addressing the human commander directly, "You are authorized to defend the colony. But remember that we are watching." "Understood, Speaker," Kyle's voice replied. Steady and professional, engaging raiders now. The tactical display showed the two human frigates' names they'd given them were Liberty and Defender, accelerating toward the colony with a speed that made several council members gasp in surprise. "How are they moving so fast?" Someone asked. "Human faster-than-light drives operate on different principles," Michelle explained quietly from her position near Danny. "They sacrifice cargo capacity for speed." The display showed the human ships splitting up, and Kyle's voice narrated the action. "Liberty, take the 3 raiders on the eastern approach. Defender will handle the western group. Focus fire on their weapon systems. Disable, don't destroy unless absolutely necessary." Danny held his breath as the first human weapons fire lit up the display. Precise, targeted shots that struck the raider ship's weapon emplacements. "Direct hits," Kyle reported. "Raider vessels 1 and 2 are losing shields. They're breaking off. Wait, Raider 3 is changing course. They're heading for the colony's residential section." The council chamber erupted in concerned voices as the display showed one raider ship diving toward where the colonists had taken shelter. "I have weapons lock," Kyle said, and Danny could hear the tension in his voice. "Requesting permission to fire. The residential section has minimal shielding," Vecthar said desperately. "If that raider fires, Morrison, you are authorized," Talman said immediately. The display showed a brilliant flash as Liberty fired, and the raider ship broke apart, but not before launching one final weapon, missile inbound on residential section. Kyle reported, voice tight. Liberty moving to intercept. What happened next took perhaps 5 seconds, but felt like an eternity to Danny. The human frigate accelerated directly into the missile's path, positioning itself between the weapon and the colony. Explosion that followed wasn't as dramatic as Danny expected. Just a bright flash on the display, but the aftermath showed Liberty tumbling. Clearly damaged Liberty status. Kyle demanded. "We're okay, Commander," a new voice replied. "Young and shaken but alive, shields are gone, and we've got hull breaches in sections 3 and 4. But we're still operational." Danny let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, and he heard similar sounds of relief from around the chamber. "Good work, Liberty," Kyle said. "Fall back to defensive position around the colony, Defender. Converge on remaining raiders." The battle continued for another 20 minutes. But the raiders had lost their advantage. The human ships were faster. Their targeting was more precise. And they fought with a controlled aggression that was clearly making the pirates nervous. "Raider vessels are retreating," Kyle finally reported. "All 6 are breaking off and jumping to faster than light. The colony is secure." The council chamber erupted in voices, some relieved, some still concerned, some clearly impressed. "Morrison, this is Speaker Talman," the ancient being said. "What is your casualty report?" 14 injured aboard Liberty, non-critical," Kyle replied. "Defender took minor damage, but no casualties. Requesting permission to land and assist with colony relief efforts." "Permission granted," Talman said. "And Commander, well done." The next several hours were a blur of activity as reports came in from Harmony Point. The colony had sustained damage, but no fatalities. The human ships had arrived just in time, and the raiders had fled the system entirely. Danny watched feeds from the colony showing human marines helping repair damaged buildings, medics treating injured aliens of species they'd never even seen before, and Kyle himself carrying an alien child to safety from a collapsed structure. Ambassador Krisa had been notably silent through the entire operation, but now he stood and addressed the chamber. "I would like to speak," he said. Former Littleman gestured permission. "I have spent the last 3 days arguing that humanity is too violent, too dangerous, too unpredictable for council membership," Krisa said. And his voice was different, quieter, less certain. I presented evidence of human conflicts, human crime, human aggression. And I believed I was protecting the council from a species that could not be trusted. He paused, and Danny saw the avian ambassador's feathers were ruffled in what might have been shame. Then I watched human soldiers risk their lives to save aliens they had never met. Creasa continued. I watched them disable rather than destroy when possible. I watched them position their own ship between a missile and children of another species. And I realized something important. The chamber was completely silent. My people achieved peace by removing our capacity for violence, Creasa said. We changed our biology so that we could not choose aggression. And we are peaceful now. Yes, but we are peaceful because we have no other option. Humans are peaceful despite having every option. They choose mercy when they could choose destruction. They choose protection when they could choose conquest. And that choice matters. He turned to look directly at Danny. Ambassador Wright. I was wrong. Creasa said simply, I withdraw my opposition to humanity's council membership. More than that, I owe your Commander Morrison a debt. He saved my nephew, who was among the researchers at Harmony Point. Danny felt something tight in his chest release. Your nephew is safe? He asked. Yes, Creasa said. Thanks to humans who had every political reason not to help and helped anyway. Vecthar spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. My nephew sent a message, he said. He asked me to tell the council something. He said the human Marines who rescued him apologized for being late, as if 18 hours was somehow too slow, as if they should have arrived faster to help people they'd never met. Lisa smiled beside Danny. That sounds about right, she murmured. Speaker Talmon stood, and his crystalline form seemed to glow with an inner light. This council has spent 3 days debating a simple question, he said. Are humans too violent for galactic society? But we were asking the wrong question. He gestured to the displays still showing human ships at Harmony Point. The real question is not whether humans can fight. Talmon continued. Clearly they can. The question is, what do humans fight for? And today, we learn the answer. Humans fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. They fight to protect innocence. They fight to prevent harm. And yes, they have fought thousands of wars in their history. But perhaps that history taught them exactly when violence is justified and when it is not. The speaker raised his voice to address the full assembly. I call for an immediate vote on humanity's council membership, he announced. All in favor of confirming Earth's place in the galactic community. The chamber erupted in affirmative responses, chimes, and calls and gestures from hundreds of species, and Danny watched in amazement as the vote tally appeared. On the central display, 97% in favor. The vote is decided, Talmon declared. Humanity is confirmed as a full member of the Galactic Council, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. Danny felt Lisa grab his hand and squeeze, and he realized he was shaking slightly. We did it, she whispered. Kyle did it, Danny corrected. And every human who chose to help. The formal session ended and species began filing out. But many stopped to speak with Danny, offering congratulations, expressing relief, thanking him for the rescue operation. Vecthar approached last, and the insectoid ambassador looked exhausted but happy. Thank you, he said simply, for choosing to save lives over politics. We didn't really have a choice, Danny replied. Not the kind of choice we could live with anyway. That, Vecthar said, is exactly what makes humanity valuable to this council. Later that evening, Danny sat in the human quarters with Lisa, Kevin, and Michelle, watching news feeds from Earth showing celebrations at humanity's confirmed council membership. 4,000 wars, Kevin said thoughtfully, and were accepted into the galactic community, not despite that history, but because of what we learned from it. The question at the reception, Danny said, remembering when Vecthar asked how many wars Earth had fought. And I said it depends on your calendar. I gave him the wrong answer. What should you have said? Michelle asked. Danny smiled. I should have said, we fought enough wars to know we never want to fight another one unless we absolutely have to. And then I should have asked him, how many times has your species chosen peace when war was easier? Lisa nodded. That's the real measure, isn't it? She said, not how many times we failed, but how many times we've tried again. A communication came through from Harmony Point, and Kyle patched it through to the room. On the screen appeared several alien children. Various species, all looking healthy and excited. Are you Ambassador Wright? One asked.